with that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Todd Baughman, out of Ardmore. He's our weed science row crop specialist, I guess. I'm probably getting your title all wrong, but I'm close enough there. And he's going to talk to you about the new herbicide technologies here today on that. So, again, if you got questions at the end of it, feel free to ask, and feel free to catch us at the end of the meeting if you want to talk to us about anything. And if you've got a point or a question that you're not sure of, raise your hand, because chances are all of us would have that question. We want to clarify. So, with that, Dr. Baughman, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, Gary, I'll say don't worry about what you call me. As my dad always said, you can call me anything as long as you call me for dinner. So you got that taken care of, so I think we're good to go. Excited to be here. Of course, obviously, good crowd here today. Glad y'all came. This is some exciting technology. I've had an opportunity to be involved with a lot of technology through my career, and this is definitely as exciting, if not as interesting, as anything that I've dealt with. We have finally gotten to this point. We've gotten a label. We've gotten the seed. I will say, I hope if we have any technology that comes through the rest of my career quite like this one, I hope we have the herbicide and seed available the same year at the same time, because it's definitely created some challenges in getting here. I'd also say it's still interesting to me, at least in some counties outside of those regulated counties that Gary and Ryan talked about, that you can take the generic formulations of these and still spray them like you used to, but if you're in one of these cropping situations, you've got to follow the rules that are on there. With that being said, it's extremely important that we recognize those rules and regulations and follow them as close as we can, because this technology is under a tremendous amount of scrutiny. So anyway, I think that's very, very important that we consider those and know those situations, know those labels and those requirements, and try to follow those as well as we can. With that, obviously one of the big reasons and the biggest excitement to this new technology is controlling this guy right here, careless weed, pigweed, Palmer amaranth, Palmer pigweed, whatever you want to call it, has created a tremendous amount of issues for us over the last several years, not only here, but in a lot of other states. The one thing I would like to stress, and again, this technology can definitely help us here, but the difference I'd say between us and a lot of these other states as you move east, this has been our number one weed problem ever since we probably broke the ground out in Oklahoma. We've had to manage this weed our whole life as far as a weed in cotton. So some of the same things that we used to do to manage this weed are still useful tools. And so using those tools in conjunction with this technology is very, very important. Not only pigweed, we've got other things, sandhills, amaranth, or water hemp, if you want to call it, ragweed, cultivar, kochia. All of these resistant weeds, if you're dealing with them, are some of those other weeds that this technology comes and it is going to be beneficial to helping us in controlling some of those problems. So it's definitely going to be a benefit there, even though, like I said, probably the primary focus is going to be on careless weed and Palmer pigweed. The other thing is, not all of our weed problems are resistance issues. There's a lot of other weeds that we've been dealing with for several years, both in and out of the Roundup Ready system, that have been problematic weeds. You know, you take things like cutleaf evening primrose. Roundup's never been real effective on cutleaf evening primrose in some of our no-till situations as a burn down. These types of herbicides are going to be beneficial to managing some of those troublesome weeds that we've had to deal with. Things like morning glory, we're probably going to see better control of those than we've seen out of our traditional system. The other one up there, tumbleweed, Russian thistle, those types of things are all weeds that this technology can help us manage if used correctly. The two technologies I'd like to talk a little bit about today is the Bogart Extend Cotton and the Enlist Cotton. I'm going to start off with the Bogart Cotton. Probably have had the most experience, at least myself individually, with the Extend system in both soybeans and cotton, more so than the Enlist. So I've had an opportunity to look at it for several years in the system and see how it works, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Cotton that is tolerant to dicamba. However, the three herbicides that are currently labeled for this technology are the XtendiMax with Vapor Grip from Roundup, DuPont's Fexapan, and BASF's Ingenia. When we talk about the XtendiMax and Fexapan, those are similar herbicides. They both got, as Gary mentioned, the diglycolamine salt with the Vapor Grip technology. And I will say it's some pretty interesting technology to see come to light with these types of phenoxy herbicides. What you have with a traditional dicamba salt is that once it hits the surface, it starts, when it interacts in the environment, it interacts with hydrogen ions, creates an acid, and the acid is what volatilizes off either the plant or cell surface, where we get into volatility issues. This Vapor Grip is a compound that actually traps those hydrogen ions, prevents it from interacting with the acid or with the salt formulation, creating that acid and subsequently volatilizing off the surface. So it's actually some pretty neat technology. As Gary mentioned, you're not allowed to mix ammonium salt or acidic environment when you add those to it, and so you're going to increase your percentage for volatility, which would counteract some of the benefits. You don't want to use those, and again, the benefit to this Vapor Grip. The Ingenia herbicide from BASF is a new salt formulation, as Gary mentioned, a BAMPA, I believe it is, salt. If any of y'all remember the old original Baughman, that was the first salt. It was a dimethylamine salt formulation that came out years ago. And then the new formulation after it was Clarity. For any of y'all that's had any familiarity with Clarity, it's actually the same salt that's in the XtendiMax and the Fexapan. That was a lower volatility salt than the original Baughman formulation. And that was the reason for coming out with Clarity. The Ingenia is kind of that next generation salt formulation of dicamba. And it's a lower volatility salt than you see with either one of those two herbicides. So that's the difference in it and our other two formulations. But again, all of these have properties and benefits that make them more beneficial in using in the Extend cropping system to help us both with volatility and subsequently with grip. With this technology is the use of residual herbicides. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the other reasons for this. But if we're going to be successful with this technology, and if we're going to maintain this technology for the future, it's going to be very, very critical that we use a residual herbicide up front. So if we're going to do that, the other thing is those residual herbicides are going to help us kind of as a backbone to this system and give us some flexibility on a weed control timing. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the reasons for that as well. But this technology is not the Roundup technology of, say, 1996, 97, 98 when it first came out. You know, when we used to be able to kill a 3-foot pigweed with, say, 16 ounces of glyphosate. This technology is an effective herbicide, but it's not going to just melt 3-foot tall pigweed. What you'll see is you're going to see a situation where you'll kind of booger them up. You may drop them below the canopy. In some cases, they may stay below the canopy. But in other cases, I've seen them all of a sudden start curling up, and by the end of the season, you see them above the canopy. So that's why it's real critical to have a residual herbicide as a backbone. One of the things I think to think about is how many acres are you trying to manage and spray? Well, these herbicides basically are in that 4 to 6 inch weed size range. Well, I don't know anybody say that can spray all 2,000, 4,000, 5,000 acres in say a week's time. And if you think how fast a pigweed can grow, that's why the need for these residual herbicides, so we can start out when those plants are small, and hopefully by the time we get to that last field on our 2,000 or 4,000 acre farm, we're still managing a pigweed that we can control. So that's going to be one of the real keys to having a residual herbicide as your program. You know, the term I like to use is start clean and stay clean. In some of these no-till fields or some of these wheat fields that we're burning down right now, are thinking about burning down, or we're going to cut for hay and then try to go to cotton, you know, making sure that those fields are clean are real critical. This particular study was done at Altus last year. In the background, you can see where we didn't have any herbicide out prior to planting this crop. This was planted, I believe, the first week of June this last year. Of course, y'all are all aware of the situation we had trying to get the crop in. In this front plot, we had a pre-emergence herbicide put out in March. Anybody have any idea what that might be? Treflan PPI. So I'd say two things. One, for you guys that don't think your yellow herbicides are beneficial, there's some proof right there of some of the benefits that we get to those. And you get into a situation like we had last year where it was extremely wet and it was really tough getting the crop in. Having something out there up front was very important to us. This is the type of situation, even in a no-till situation, we want to go into, is a clean field situation. You don't want, even though this technology may help from a weed control standpoint, we don't want to get into plant the crop, burn it down, think we're going to take care of mare's tail, kochia, thistles, those types of things. Get those things taken care of at least a couple of weeks out in front of that, get it clean, and then now you plant it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Besides timing and stuff, you can get into some insect problems when you get into those green fields. And so things like that are things that you want to consider, and why, again, I think it's very important that we start keep clean and then use this technology to stay clean. The other thing is, of course, as mentioned, there are some issues with tank mix partners. So you want to be very cognizant of that. Check the label to make sure, or these websites to make sure that you're following any of those tank mix. I will say the good thing is when we did the first meeting, I believe it was in Lahoma, the first week of March. And there was, I don't know if there was even a herbicide on any of these products that you could tank mix when we did that first meeting. There's already a tremendous amount of products that have been added to that list with all of these labels since that first meeting to this meeting right here. So a couple things. One, it's nice that we've seen that open up. The other thing that's going to tell you is continue to watch that, because by the time you get to season, there may be the product you're looking for may have already been added to that label. The other thing, interesting enough, and I actually just saw this today, it's kind of interesting. I always say, anytime you read these labels, it seems like you always pick up something new. And I'm not talking about just these, I'm just talking about any label in particular. I was looking on the list of one of these, and it had that you can tank mix Fireball with this product. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. I thought the only people that tank mix Fireball were college students at OSU or somewhere. Interesting enough, that's a glyphosate formulation. I found out later. But anyway, that's why it's real critical, one, to check these out, and two, to actually look at the label to make sure that you know what you're doing. So anyway, so these websites are very important. Not only do they have tank mix regulations on them, they've got kind of the use pattern, and then in addition, the nozzle, and in some cases the nozzle pressure that you want to use those nozzles in. So it's very critical to make sure that your tank mixes and your nozzles are for this label. The reason for this is, again, to lower our potential for volatility and drift. All of these tank mix partners have had to been tested to determine that they're not going to increase drift or increase volatility of the product. And so that's why we've got these regulations and why these websites are out there. So we're making sure we're not creating an additional problem that we might have. Okay, as far as our experience in Roundup Ready cotton, this last year had the opportunity to work with Randy and Rocky and the crew there at Altus on a project with Monsanto looking at this technology. We looked at it kind of in a systems approach. The other thing, and I think Gary mentioned this, but I'll reiterate, with the Extend cotton, this technology is resistant to any of the glyphosate formulation. It's tolerant to Liberty, the glufosinate product, and it's also tolerant to the dicamba formulation. Again, you want to make sure if you're choosing a generic product that it's recommended as one of those tank mix partners before you do that. So it'll be very, very important to check that. In this first study that we had, in the first treatment, we had Treflan, followed by Extendamax, which was the dicamba only, followed by Warrant with Warrant as a residual early post, and then followed by Roundup Extend. Our two weeds were Palmer pigweed and red sprangletop. 100% control of both of those species in that trial last year at Altus. Our yields were over 1,500 pounds per acre with that system. If you look at that compared to, say, a Liberty system alone, that same program except with Liberty, 54% control of pigweed and 99% control of red sprangletop, and our yields were about 500 pounds less than our Extend program. As many of y'all are aware of, the Liberty program is extremely difficult to manage on careless weed because of the size that you've got to control. And if you get any growth out there whatsoever, you're going to have some escapes kind of like we've seen here. We also looked at Caparol, had excellent control of pigweed with Caparol as our base pre. However, not as good a control of red sprangletop as we had with our yellow herbicide. So again, some of the benefits we see with yellow herbicides a lot of times on things like red sprangletop. The other one that I deal with in some areas is Colorado grass or Texas panicum. Yellow herbicides are still one of the best probably pre-products for that grassy weed as well. Again, of course, kind of similar results with Caparol, except not as good control again of the red sprangletop. Our yield somewhat less with that. And then if we look at our Treflan followed by Caparol by the Extendamax program, 100% control with those. And then when we follow those by Liberty, excellent control of red sprangletop, but again, not quite the control we'd like to see as a pigweed. So this is going to be kind of beneficial again when you look at it for managing glyphosate-resistant pigweed compared to the Liberty system that we've been trying to use at least in some places. And also, of course, we can kind of get by with a little bit less of a residual program. As I mentioned earlier, I've done a lot of work over the last 2 or 3 years with this technology in soybeans, and we've seen kind of a lot of the same thing there. A lot of the soybean we work is up in the Northeast district where we have a heavy population of glyphosate-resistant pigweed. Typically in the old Roundup system or even in the Liberty, we'd have to have a pretty stout pre-emergent program up front to make those work. This technology, we can go with what I'd say is some less aggressive or maybe less expensive residual programs and make them work as well in it. But a residual program is still real key to making it work. The other thing is the Roundup Ready Extend program is going to help us on horseweed control. Shane, this was a study that you did a couple of years ago, looking at Ingenia plus Roundup Power Max out front. This was 30 days after the treatment. You can see the horseweed control that we had versus control with this system. Excellent control of mare's tail, worked very, very well. The other thing that this technology brings to the table for us is typically with these technologies where we've had to be 30 days or further out in advance before we could plant, that's going to shorten that window for us tremendously where we get in that situation and we won't have to worry as much about that plant back. Or, of course, if you actually read the dicamba label, it's an inch of rain and then 28 days after application. So, you know, those years where we didn't get the rain that we needed and were somewhat concerned, that's going to alleviate some of those issues for us and help us. So it can be a good burn down program and helpful. The other question that I've gotten asked in several meetings, and I'll just address it right now, if you use a generic product as the burn down, you're still under those generic labels. So that inch of rain in 28 days falls under that label as it stands today. So that's another thing to consider as well. This is a study that we did on bare ground up at Bixby. Again, it's on our glyphosate-resistant Palmer pigweed. If any of y'all have ever been on that station, from a weed science standpoint, it's a weed science. It's a dream location to work at. We usually grow about 6 foot tall pigweeds and probably about 100 per square foot when they first come up out of the ground. So anyway, this was a study we did in 2015, and it kind of reiterates what I was talking about that size issue with this technology versus the Roundup when it first came out. This was a study 2 weeks after each of the treatments. We rated it with a pre-emergence application of dicamba or Ingenia plus Roundup. We were looking at about 60% control. When we applied that to 4 to 6 inch pigweeds, almost 100% control in that 4 to 6 inch range. When we got out to 24 inches, excuse me, when we got out to 24 inches, that control dropped to 80%, and at 36 inches, we were below 60%. So again, trying to use this as a harvest aid, while you may see some benefits out of it, it's not going to be a foolproof solution. And if you have a population like we've got at Bixby, with either one of these treatments, you're essentially not going to harvest that field. That's how heavy and how big a problem that is. And essentially, like I said, you just kind of melt those weeds. You don't really control them. So you definitely want to be in that early timing. And another reason why that residual program up front to help keep us in that window from start to finish is very key. Okay, the second system that we've had some experience with is the Enlist weed control system. The product that is currently labeled for this system is Enlist Duo Herbicide, which is a new salt formulation, the choline salt of 2,4-D. Again, it's a salt formulation that has a lower volatility, much like if you think we had the low vol ester, then we have an amine, now we have the choline salt, which is a lower volatility formulation than any of those. The other thing is it contains this Okstate technology. One of the things that you'll notice with this product is that it doesn't have the smell that we typically associate with 2,4-D. So that odor that you're used to, you're not going to see with it. It also has some additional handling properties, some drip control and that type of things with it. So there's a lot of advantages to this technology as a whole. Okay, as far as specific instruction, again, you only want to apply with nozzles that are approved by the label. The other, excuse me guys, the other thing to consider is with those labels, there are specific pressure ranges that are recommended on the label to use those in, and you want to stay in that pressure area. The other thing is only tank mix with products approved on the enlisttankmix.com site. So just like these other products, it's going to be real key. There's a list of 50 or 60, I think, on there right now. Okay, over 150 now. I never was good at guessing weights on cattle, and I guess I'm not real good at guessing.
They just uploaded them, so
okay. Anyway, so again, it's real key, and I think as any of these guys would tell you, I mean, the way that list has grown in the short period, I think we'll just continue to see additional products added to that as we move forward. So you want to make sure, and again, the big reason for that is to make sure that any product that we stick in the tank is not going to cause us an issue from a volatility standpoint or a drift standpoint. if y'all remember, I don't remember what Roundup formulation it was, Ultra, I think it was years ago. There were some initial studies that showed you got a slightly smaller droplet on the back end of your fines with that formulation compared to the glyphosate formulation before that. So anyway, that's what they're trying to prevent, that you don't put something in that tank that creates a higher percentage of those fines on that bottom end and causes you some drift issues, or again, affects this technology from a volatility standpoint. So you want to be very, very cognizant of that. As far as research is concerned, at the Altus location, we had a study with Enlist cotton this past year. The Enlist cotton is also tolerant to glyphosate and also tolerant to Liberty or glufosinate. So both of those technologies are available for use in it, along with 2,4-D. As Gary mentioned, and I know I've heard Randy mention several times, 2,4-D cotton or Enlist cotton is not tolerant to dicamba, Extendamax, Ingenia, any of those. Extend cotton is not tolerant to Enlist, Duo, or any 2,4-D formulation. So you want to make sure that you're aware of that and control that both from a drift standpoint, tank mix contamination, or spraying the wrong field. So anyway, I think that's one thing to definitely think about. In this study, we used Cotoran-free to all of our post treatments. Again, we had the same weed species, Palmer pigweed or red springletop. After the Cotoran-free, we put Liberty out twice post. On pigweed, we were about 95% control, and we had 100% control of red springletop. The one thing that you will see the difference here with the Liberty, and I think one of the things you see that Cotoran-free up front, we got that size differential that we needed with Liberty, and that helped us from a control standpoint compared to the study that I showed earlier. When we put the Enlist Duo out twice post, 100% control of both of those weeds. So very, very effective control with that two-post system after a pre. When we put Enlist out followed by Liberty, excellent control of red springletop, but again, we were in that kind of 95% range of pigweed. And I think what we saw was the few escapes we had, we weren't able to control them with that second shot of Liberty or take them completely down where we were with that second application of Enlist Duo. And that's pretty typical of what we would see with that technology. This is just a slide of the field this past year that you can see. This is Cotoran-free plus Enlist Duo. You can see the population of pigweeds in our border areas. We sprayed these center two rows. With the Cotoran followed by Liberty post, you can see some of those escaped pigweeds that we had. You know, in a situation, there may be only 2 or 3, say, in that row, but any of y'all are aware of trying to strip a cotton row with a 3-foot tall pigweed stock is not necessarily the most fun thing to do. So that's where we see the real benefit to that second application of Enlist Duo in this system, and we saw it. The other thing to consider, I don't have any burn down work with the Enlist Duo, but just like I talked about with the dicamba system, if you're going to try to use the generic as a burn down up front, you've got to follow the label of those. And the one thing that I will reiterate is, I've looked at I don't know how many 2,4-D labels over the years, and it seems like every dang one of them's different. You know, one of them may not even have a fallow label on it. One of them may be 14 days, now one of them may be 28. So making sure if you do that, that you're in those label guidelines, because once you're using that product, you're following that label still in this system. The other thing that I would make sure before I ever did that was making sure that's not going to throw me out of any program benefits up front. I don't know what those are. I don't know if there's any out there, but I do know in the past, I know when Roundup was first generated, there were some benefits. I know there's some benefits going to be out there for residual programs, so you're going to want to make sure and be aware of those programs that may fit your system best and be the biggest benefit both from a weed control but also an economical standpoint. So make sure and check on those before you do anything that may harm you, at least from that standpoint. Okay, some potential issues with the technology. Obviously, the first one is drift. The other thing that I will say, while these are lower volatility products, they are not going to eliminate drift completely. If you spray this technology in a 30-mile-an-hour wind, you're going to have drift problems irregardless of it being a low volatile product, and it doesn't matter what nozzle you're using or what drift control agent. You know, the story I like to say is most of the major drift control or drift issues that I've ever walked, drift complaints, have been physical drift. And the other example that I like to use, I've walked drift complaints for Roundup, Ally, Finesse, those types of products. Those are non-volatile products. They're lower volatility than any of this new technology that's coming out. The problem was it was sprayed when the conditions weren't right with a sensitive crop nearby. Physical drift drifted that product onto those fields and caused drift problems. With this technology, if we do that, we're going to have the same problems that we would have with one of those products just as well. So it's going to be very, very critical, again, to follow the recommendations, follow some of those nozzle programs, that sort of thing, to try to minimize this as much as possible. I know none of us have probably had our head buried in the sand, and we've seen there's been some other states east of us that have had some critical issues with this, and we don't want to be a part of that problem, and we don't want to lose this technology, because if we did, I'm not sure how we would control resistant pigweed post-emergence right now in cotton. So it's very, very cognizant that we take care of this technology. Some of the other things are application issues, sprayer contamination, and label requirements. Again, following the right nozzle with the program that we're using, being cognizant of some of those buffer zones, downwind sensitive crops, you know, knowing what's around you, where it's at. You know, one of the comments that I heard about a downwind sensitive crop is if I'm sitting up in my sprayer and I can see a crop from that cab, that's a sensitive crop that's nearby and I can potentially drift on it. So being cognizant of that is very, very, very important. As I mentioned more than once, this is not the glyphosate of the mid-90s. It's an excellent tool, can be real beneficial to us, but timing is very, very critical. And part of the reason that we need a residual is to help so we don't get into a situation like this, and we also don't create future resistance issues. Because right now, outside of this technology, I can't tell you where the next golden bullet per se is at. And I always like to say, you know, we've always come up with a new golden bullet. Anytime we've got into an issue, we've always come up with that. I'm not sure where that next one is. And to kind of give you an example, this is the reason why. This was a study out of Purdue University. Out of 140 tested chemicals, only one of those will make it to the market. So that's where we start with. So any of the things that they're looking at right now, the potential to get there is pretty limited. Right now, it takes about 11 years of testing to get a product to market. Seems like even longer with this technology, John. And with the biotech trait, we're looking at 13 years of testing. So you can see the time that it takes chemistry to get to the market or get a trait to the market. The other thing that's been a big change is the cost of getting this type of technology or a chemistry to the market. If we look at a pesticide, in 2001 it was about $90 million to get a product to market. Now it's over $230 to get that product to market. With the biotech trait, we're looking at about $140 million to bring that trait to market. So you can see the cost that it takes. And with this extended timeline, that reduces the time for a company to be able to recoup its investment and make a profit on that. So a product's really got to be able to make it through the EPA, FDA, whatever that is, chain, and also be able to make a profit fairly shortly for us to ever see it. Just to kind of give you another example of why I'm not sure where the next product is. The last new mode of action that we saw released as a herbicide was the HPPD herbicide. I'm sure a lot of y'all that's got any wheat or sorghum are familiar with Husky herbicide. Husky is an HPPD herbicide. Those products were first discovered in the late 70s or early 80s. Currently, they're only labeled in grass crops. There are a couple of companies that are looking at bringing biotech traits in cotton and soybeans to the market that will be tolerant to HPPD. But in cotton, we're several years away. I'm not even sure when. I haven't even tested the HPPD technology. I believe Wayne and Pete have had an opportunity to look at it on a very, very limited basis out at Lubbock. But we are a ways away from seeing that. So, you know, basically, in my weed science career, to a large degree, you know, when I first started, I got to see a lot of new technology. You know, I was there when the ALSs came out, the Emmys came out, the PPOs, Valor, or Sharpen, any of you guys that use that, those technologies. But since then, really haven't seen a new mode of action. And so where that critter, I guess, is at, we'll wait to see. I keep thinking it's out there and eventually one of these companies will find it. But today, I can't tell you, I'm looking at the answer down the road for us. Again, just another example, cotton-only herbicides for in-season use. MSMA, Caparol, and Cotaran, the 60s and 70s. Staple in 1996, and then Break FX came out in 16. But the actual herbicide was first labeled in 86 in ponds. So again, you know, we haven't seen a lot of new technology. And if you talk to any of these companies, I can tell you, corn number one, soybean number two. Cotton is down the list on a developmental situation. So you're looking at either some product like Break, maybe that can fit over a multitude of crops, or the chances of finding that is going to be somewhat limited in cotton as well. So again, why it's very, very critical that we try to protect this technology.